It's finally happened. India has its own NCAP. Bharat NCAP has been announced and goes online on the 1st of October of this year. But we have to now understand what it means and also how we got here. Remember that there's been a very steady sort of push for something like this to happen for almost a decade, in fact more than a decade. And we have two institutes or agencies and of course the people there to really thank for this. IRTE is very much Indian, and that's a name you've heard from me before. And the second, of course, is Global NCAP, another name that you've always heard from me. And joining me right now from IRTE, Dr. Rohit Baluja, and from Global NCAP, Alejandro Furas. It's wonderful to see you both. It's good to see you both together after a very long time. We're all in one room together, so that's nice. Thank you. Thank you for your time today. Dr. Baluja, I'll start with you. Bharat NCAP, just saying it sounds good, that it's no longer conjecture or a pipe dream, but it's finally gotten announced. Is this what we have all been sort of waiting for?
Yes, if you may permit, the whole idea of what started was that in 2007, I was on my way to train the police in Jaipur, and on the way I was told that our Minister Sahib Singh Verma has been killed in a road crash. And I had the opportunity to investigate that crash half an hour after the incident. The vehicle was a sandwich. People just died. And at the United Nations, they were talking of NCAPs, they were talking of regulations, and I went from pillar to post to my automobile industry, to the government, and asked them, do we crash vehicles in India? And they said, no, we don't. But we have regulations of the Working Party one and what they had signed. And I said, no, but why did this car crash? And I took this picture and film to Germany, to Austria, and they said, there's something wrong with the car. And then requesting NCAP, Global NCAP, other NCAPs, how could we actually bring this to India? And from that time, that inquisitiveness, is there something that people can be safe in their cars, was the thought process. And then Global NCAP took it over.
And the rest is history, as they say. But at the time that this whole process started, I mean, this is before, let's go back even before the first crash tests for Made in India cars. But, you know, bringing in this idea of safer cars for India, doing a whole program, there was always going to be this end goal that India gets its own NCAP. But what was the thinking? Why was India important at that time?
It's not just that time, it is important. It's actually one of the top markets when it comes to the G20, and you see actually the scale up for the whole G20 group. India is one of the biggest ones. Nowadays, in terms of population, it's the most populated country in the world, so definitely you have a priority position. On top of that, you also have, I would say, a problem that we all have, but in the Indian market, it was in a different dimension, because we have seen other markets. China was developing in a certain direction. India was still not taking off in certain regulation criteria and certain regulation requirements at that time. And there was a need of a push in India to start triggering all those developments. So that's the reason why it became such a high priority. Nowadays, if you put it in perspective, India went much faster into the much safer vehicles than any other region in the world in the last 10 years.
You know, the impact of the, no pun intended, of those first tests. I remember when we first put those stories out, for example, the kind of response we got from people, emotional responses as well, where it wasn't a question of, this is not something we had thought about. It was something also like, we just didn't think about this. We just didn't know. That was the primary response. And we've seen the push from the consumer ever since has also steadily grown. I mean, safety has now become a priority for buying a new product. This process, even though the announcement of the NCAP may have taken longer, sir, the fact that it turned at least the conversation in the right direction, got the regular consumer to wake up and take note, that part is gratifying? It put a lot of pressure eventually on the government.
Absolutely. I mean, basically Indians, we trust, we have a faith. We say it's faith in the Lord, that it has happened because the Lord wished to do it. So if we are traveling in a bus, we believe that, you would be safe. We travel in an aircraft, we believe you are safe. We are buying a vehicle, we believe the manufacturer has given us a safer vehicle, but they never realized this, that the vehicles were not safe. And then as we started to improve our roadways, today we see that a highway has a 100-kilometer speed limit, an expressway has 120-kilometer speed limit, but the road environment is not suited to those speeds. And we still drive all vehicles, whether they are the worst to the best, at that same road, same speeds, and then people don't know that they are not safe. So the whole transformation has happened by the knowledge which came in that there is something safe and something unsafe. And today there is a bit of a knowledge, but still I think the gap is still maybe 10% of the people believe that safety has to be considered, 90 still do not. That's what I think.
And there's a lot of other stuff that distracts them when they go to make a purchase decision. The point about information and the awareness that it brings, that's going to be an ongoing process, right? I mean, of course, we have the Bharat NCAP, and we shouldn't sort of rest on those laurels because, as Dr. Baluja said, people still don't understand a lot of it. Like one of the things that keeps coming up to me as backlash or cynicism from even just regular people on social media is, hey, what's the big deal? You're crashing this car at 64 kilometers per hour, and that's not. I mean, that's nothing. What happens if the accident happens at 100 or 120? The fact that it's based on a certain science, that's lost on them. That's fine, but this awareness that it has to carry on going up, how much of that onus do you think has to be taken on by Bharat NCAP?
A big part of it, probably all of it, is like a torch has been developing and growing, knowledge, awareness. Now it's for Bharat NCAP to take over, but it doesn't mean that all the other actors must relax. So it's, let's say now they have the main role is for Bharat NCAP to lead in all this, but all the others that we are acting and trying to improve road safety, we should not be silent, or we should keep the efforts ongoing. Something we need to understand as well is that sometimes people react in a negative way into the crash test because they don't know the science, as you mentioned. What we're trying to simulate is not right that speed, is basically trying to simulate the energy of the crash. And it happens that higher speed sometimes is equivalent to what we have seen in the laboratory. The main problem here is that some people say, yeah, that's perfect in a 5-star car, but I cannot pay for it. And we need to push the industry and push the market in a way to understand and for consumers to understand that safety is a right. You don't have to pay extra for safety that is standard anywhere else. And that's what we're fighting for. Democratizing safety, that's the way we want to say it.
Yeah. Tell me though, when you talk about what's happening with not just the NCAPs, but regulations in general worldwide, where AI and predictive technology is also now starting to play such a huge role in the prevention of accidents or prevention of damage and of course injuries. The fact that we've done, like you said, we've done this last 10 years much quicker than what many other developed markets may have done. Do you think that we'll embrace technology as well, and we'll start to see changes in regulation a lot faster as well in India?
I hope so. What we are seeing definitely in India is that manufacturers are speeding up in adopting these technologies. We are seeing local manufacturers developing their own technologies as well, which is becoming more and more evident. The question will be how to penetrate, to make these technologies to penetrate in the market to different levels and not just to the very expensive cars or luxury cars. That's one of the tricky things we need to. But if you take a look at what happened, for example, in Europe not so long ago, all cars must have AEB as a standard. And trucks and heavy vehicles had as a mandatory regulation for new models in 2015. So it's quite a long time ago. The point is that it's about taking the decision, and together with taking the decision from the authorities, there's also a push for local development. And I think that India is set up in an ideal point of time to do that, to set up a goal of a certain amount of years ahead of where we are now. This is the goal. We need to have the cars fitted with AEB and increase the penetration of AEB as much as possible, because it's not the solution, it's not the silver bullet, but it has a lot of benefits that we are seeing already, not just in terms of safety, but also in re-educating drivers. So both things combined are making a huge benefit.
And this aspect of educating drivers, you of course have already been doing that very actively, sir, but how important is it to make that a national priority? Because we get caught in this gap between central and state government, who has jurisdiction, who needs to police it. We find that, and that's across the board, right? That's on infrastructure, that's on signage, that's on awarding licenses, everything. We keep getting caught in this little battle between center and state. National priority to go along with infrastructure changes and regulation changes?
If we take driver and the driver licensing system, today the demand of the licenses is so huge, because we have now 330 million vehicles and about 30 million licenses are issued every year. And if you see, to a motor licensing officer, an officer should be giving not more than 200 to 250 licenses a day in urban areas. In comparison to a West, a licensing officer would not give more than 10. So here it is politicians, the politics, the demand that we need to supply. Now that's where we are going wrong. The growth is amazing because of we don't control the drivers, and the drivers don't have the knowledge. So neither of the road, nor of the law, nor of traffic control devices, or nor of the vehicle. So today the best thing is the driver believes that I am buying a vehicle which is perfectly fine, it's fitted with everything, I don't have to check the oil, I don't have to do anything, why should I know about the vehicle? The technology is giving me all the answers, and so they don't bother about it. So unfortunately, the system today is that you don't need to have education to get a license to drive. The laws are changing so fast, but there's no renewal of a license and a testing of a driver before the license. So there is a big gap between what is required, and I think this is all a gap in is the politician today responsible for the number of deaths or accidents happening in the country? Do we take it as a political bar when you go for elections? No.
Yeah, it's not even
and
considered.
So today we don't consider, and 820 people according to World Health Organization are dying in India every single day. 16 times more serious injuries, but they happen in pockets. They're not VIPs, they're poor people, low income people, and we really don't bother about. We were talking about the cost of airbags and the cost of to serious injury to death. 96 lakhs what the government says is social cost because of death, and 3.6 lakhs due to serious injury. And what is the cost of altogether ESC, airbags and seat belts? What would it cost?
Less than
nothing.
500.
Yeah, comparatively nothing anyway. But this is going to be ongoing, and there's also the other aspect, right, where people today who are well educated, who have the means to buy fairly sophisticated products, even they carry a lot of misnomers, right? Like, oh, I bought a car with 6 airbags, I don't need to wear my seat belt. Stupid things like that. We really have a long way to go in terms of the correct information and education, as Sir said. But on to the Bharat NCAP itself, one of the things that got discussed a lot yesterday was one of the announcements which came out, which talked about the comparative pricing of doing a test in India versus doing a test anywhere else. And so how great Bharat NCAP will be, because now it will also perhaps attract manufacturers to do tests for other markets also in India, because it could be a business opportunity. I don't want to get into the mathematical detail of it, but broadly, will you still, as Global NCAP, have this sort of mission to make sure that the correct things are still understood by everybody, all the stakeholders, including the consumer?
Let's say in principle, we have an MOU now signed with Bharat NCAP. We want to honor it in all the ways, and we are there to cooperate as much as is requested from us on one side. I think that part of the cooperation is trying to follow up that things are running in a proper way, in a proper direction, and things are not going away from certain basic concepts. Now, hypothetically, what should be happening is that naturally Global NCAP stop testing cars that we buy by ourselves once the Bharat NCAP is up and running and established. and still have the opportunity that if a manufacturer wants to come to us and say, I want to have a global NCAP rating, because we're testing for other markets as well, therefore that would be a point. Now, coming right into the scenario where India can become a center of testing, or it can be the case, but for that you need to have certain level of quality of the service. That means the quality of, not the laboratories. Laboratories are well equipped and you have all the infrastructure you need. It's about getting the proper certification, the proper accreditation of the laboratories. And I'm not saying that it's going to happen soon, but it's feasible that that can become an option for India. But there's still a long way to go in terms of becoming a certain position into the market of testing cars. What has been happening in the car industry, which is incredible in the last years, is that India took over some other markets. Basically, the stole production from other markets in a nice way. I don't want to say that word, so it's not a negative word, but basically they took over because you're offering better products, better price, better quality in general. So that's actually the reason why many production lines were moved into India, and India basically took over some local productions to offer and supply different markets. That can happen in testing as well, but it has still a long way to grow. It's still, I mean, the Bharat NCAP just was launched a few hours ago. Still a long way to go. It's possible, yes.
And to meet the demand of the local requirement in terms of vehicles that need to be certified for just India, that's going to be a lot of cars anyway. I mean, I know it's voluntary, but point being that, like you said, a lot of them are being built for India and for exports. So they may not really have the opportunity to look at attracting business from overseas, because they'll have their hands full, presumably, with what's happening in India. All right, so one last thing I'd like to get from both of you. In general, we all agree that this is a positive move. What is it that you'd like to still see happen? Dr. Baluja, if you would like to see one other thing which, is a very definite part of this puzzle that you think is missing or that should happen.
Bharat NCAP should actually incorporate all other stakeholders, which come from the consumers, from the insurance, from the automobile industry, from the component industry, from research institutions. It should not remain as a government body only, and it should open its doors to this. Second is that we need to gain expertise what all the NCAPs have done. It is not just an announcement. It is perhaps just not that we also have automobile engineers and technology. It is to integrate the knowledge of how to use the technology in the optimum and scientific manner and grow along with what the other NCAPs are doing. That's a challenge. And that, I think, we should be ready for that challenge.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. What would you like to see happen, Ale? I mean, there's a lot of talk about the stickers as well, for example. That's also voluntary at this point.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that I would like to see happening, first of all, is that they stick to the protocols and assessments without being influenced by the industry, which is they try to persuade to change certain criteria. So the first thing I would like to see happening is that they stick to those. If they are taking Global NCAP once at the moment, and sticking as much as they can into certain things that you can make a little bit more flexible in timing, for example, but criteria of judging results, that's something they need to stick really to the basics, to what they have taken. That's the first thing I would like to see. The second, in line to what Dr. Baluja said, we need to have a more representative board. Society, this is Bharat NCAP, it doesn't belong to the government, it belongs to the society, to the Indian society, and as such, you need to have certain representation of the different society areas in the board. That's a very relevant thing. And last but not least, I think that in order to make this sustainable, it would be great that at some point we reach a point of mandatory labeling, or the way you want to call it. Labeling is basically when we do it for some products like energy, for example, for electric products on energy labeling and stuff, that you do the same for safety labeling. And you can do, probably in the future, we're going to talk about also of emissions and environmental labeling as well for cars, so you integrate both in one. But that would be ideal that all cars that are sold in the market, they need to be labeled. So they need to be tested, they need to be rated, and that has to be, let's say, visible for the consumers. Probably not as a sticker in individual cars, but at least in a digital platform, you can scan a QR and have the information right away with you. That's something that will secure sustainability of the whole program in the mid to long term. But keeping the decision of the Bharat NCAP with very good dialogue with the industry, but at the same time sticking to the basics, sticking to the concepts, basics, that's not an easy job. That's probably the baseline of what they need to get up front.
Well, I mean, let's hope that it all moves in the positive direction as it should. Thank you both for your time today. I'm going to add to what both of you said and say the one other thing that needs to happen is that all of you who are watching and who are consumers of these products, you need to do your bit as well. Make sure that you understand the safety features in your vehicles and then also know how to use them and then actually use them. That's very, very crucial as well, because that's also going to make a huge difference in changing some of these horrible statistics that we always start these conversations with. Thank you for watching.